Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Future of Team podcast. Oh, today is a topic that for me, I always get not scared is probably the wrong word to describe it, but as a white
Apprehensive.
male talking about inclusivity, diversity, equity, belonging, it is a loaded topic. And it is one that for me, I find myself consciously avoiding a lot of the times when it's out in on X or in these social communities and networks, um, because I often find that my voice is not the voice that needs to be heard, right? I mean, I'm there to support and be an ally and champion where I can, but I feel like every time I open my mouth to share an opinion, it's going to be the wrong opinion or it's not going to be something I can and should say. So I always get scared. But I think that today, hopefully, as we get into this, if you feel like me, hopefully today will be a day to alleviate some of that and to create an opportunity to invite you to participate in the conversation. And maybe this is that safe space for you to actually engage in that conversation. But as always, I am joined by Dee, my lovely co-host. We've been talking about this already a little bit and sharing a little bit. We've both got lots to say. How are you, Dee?
This is
How are
true.
things?
I am very well, thank you. I am loving the change of season that we're having, and even though it means getting up a little earlier to catch up with you, but I'm excited about the prospect of talking about this. I know that we're not going to solve it in one conversation, but I do love the opportunity to open the can of worms, really, I guess, and to have a little look at it and have a poke around and see where we land. I think there's lots of great things to say about it. I think it's going to be fun. Let's do it.
Well, let's start off by just saying that we are both open to being wrong. At least,
Yeah,
and I'll speak for myself here and say
sure.
that by no means is this a conversation where I'm expecting you to accept everything I say as the only truth that there is, and it's the only way to look at things or the best way. And I hope that if I do say something that you disagree with or that you have a different perspective on, that you would feel safe and comfortable enough to share in comments and let us know what you think and be
Sure.
open and
That'd be
willing to
great.
correct as well,
Yeah.
because that's how we grow as individuals and as leaders, is when people are
Yeah.
willing to share their thoughts and perspective.
I think the other thing that we're also mindful of is that we both, you know, I can represent an underrepresented group in the sense that
Mm,
I'm a woman, but I am a white woman
mm,
and acutely aware of the privilege that's wrapped around that. So we don't purport to speak for all groups,
that's
but
right.
we are very interested in how we can make the areas that we work more inclusive for those groups and how we can be open to learning and hearing from voices that represent those groups for sure.
Absolutely. And at Future of Team, we have what we call our core principles or our 8 principles. And one of those is the concept of inclusive culture. You cannot really have an inclusive culture without first addressing inclusivity at the leadership level. It
Right.
always starts from the top. So today, while yes, inclusive culture is one of the principles that we really espouse and want to champion and want to see organizations really integrate into their culture, we recognize it starts with leadership. In fact, as we were doing research for this, I found this article from the Harvard Business Review, and it said this really interesting thing that I think just hits the nail on the head for this. It says that what leaders say and do makes up to a 70% difference as to whether an individual reports feeling included. So when I hear that, what that says to me is that there is an outsized impact of the role a leader plays in helping people in their team feel included when they are saying the right things and doing the right things. And so hopefully today we can unpack that a little bit and come up with some ideas of what does this actually mean and look like for leaders when it comes
Hmm.
to being an inclusive leader. Yeah, and hopefully giving all of us a sense of what it looks like at any level of an organization. So, Dee, you and I have talked a little bit about this. You're working on a project right now that is all about kind of like women in leadership in WordPress. I'd love maybe just give us a little bit of background on that and tell us a little bit about what you're working on in that regard, because I think that's helpful context as well as we jump into this.
Sure. Well, I'm working with a group spearheaded by Francesca Morano and Siobhan McEwen called WP Includes, which is a mentorship program geared towards helping women prepare for being leaders. So we have women in leadership in the WordPress community offering themselves and their time to help support other women who also want to kind of move into leadership. So probably 4 or 5 month program. We match people up, women or women female identifying. See, I'm losing it already. So I'm getting the right language already around this. Who want to push into that leadership arena. We match them up and set them running in this mentorship program. And we meet. I have a mentee. I am a mentor. We meet once a month. We talk about areas and issues that they've been finding and where they need support, and coach basically a little bit about what they're involved in, with a view to helping to build up that confidence and that sense of being able to take up space in areas in their companies where there is significant inequity around, particularly the gender breakdown in leadership in WordPress. And so it's new and young, and we're learning, and we've just done we're closing in on the end of our first, I don't know what you call it, the first program, the first iteration, I guess, and cohort. Yeah. And so I'm really interested to kind of get a sense from everybody how it's gone and how we can continue to improve. But yeah, it's great to be part of something that's wanting to make that kind of difference.
I think, from my perspective, what's really cool about that is, number one, it's identifying that there is a definite need
Right.
for leadership mentorship for women, especially in WordPress, right? Like where it has been so heavily dominated by men, especially a lot of our larger companies. You look in the WordPress ecosystem and they're all CEO'd by men for the most part.
Yeah.
We are starting to see some diversity showing up, really cool, and some young, I say young, but kind of my age, so maybe not so young,
Yeah.
women leaders step into influence and into roles, which is really cool. But we need more. And
Got a long way to go.
got a long way to go. I have, I said a little earlier that I did a bit of research on this. And one of the really cool things that I found was this article by Harvard Business Review where they talked about and they called out like 6 traits that in their studies. And if you don't know what Harvard Business Review is, it's like this academic collective. So it's like the researchers who do research projects around leadership and business for Harvard School of Business. And anyway, they write articles about what they're learning and what the studies are showing. And in a bunch of the studies they've done, they discovered or they've been finding 6 traits in particular that inclusive leaders have. And I thought, for the purposes of our conversation, as we're talking about inclusive leadership, it would be kind of neat to maybe just go through those 6 areas and maybe do like a bit of a react to that and give our own thoughts on what we think, whether we agree or disagree. So if you're cool with that, Dee, I'm just going to jump right in.
Yeah, I'm in. I'm looking up to the side. I keep
looking at
because I'm sitting here looking at them going, yeah.
Well, first one that is on this, these aren't in any particular order, but after we go through them, I will tell you which one they've identified as the most important one. But I'm going to be curious to see as we chat if you can figure it out. But the first one on their list is the idea of visible commitment. And they say that inclusive leaders articulate authentic commitment to diversity, challenge the status quo, hold others accountable, and make diversity and inclusion a personal priority. So it's a visible commitment. What do you think?
I think the thing that stands out for me there in that line actually is that it's a personal priority, because I've heard this phrase, what runs in the leader runs in the team. I've had it used against me in the past, so I'm a little iffy about it from time to time, but I don't think it's wrong, actually.
Mm.
If you make this commitment personally that you want the place that you work, the team that you're in, to have access to those different voices, to be diverse, because you understand what that's going to bring to your organization that runs in you personally, then it will spill over. But if you're afraid of change and you are scared of this and you're not prepared and willing, really, you want to you want to make the right noises, but if you don't actually feel it personally, then yeah, I think you're not going to go very far in this being able to make your workplace diverse, because people understand and recognize that inauthenticity.
Well,
So
there's
yes, the
also,
visible commitment.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
it
carry on.
has to be visible, right? Like if you think
Yeah.
of the reality is if you just pay lip service to it, right? Or if you like, it's even more like if you, I would say it's worse if you are doing a do as I say, not as I do, right?
Well,
Type of thing.
I have an example.
Mm.
I know that and I'm probably cautious because I know that you're setting yourself up for all those people that sit there going, correctness, political correctness gone wrong. But just calling people guys, hey, like,
Mm.
I remember in jobs I've had gone past where we've made that decision, we're not going to do that anymore.
Yeah.
And people were comfortable enough to be called out on it when it did happen. And yet there are still organizations that go, yeah, we want more inclusion. But every day I'm hearing, hey guys, how's it going? And I'm like, and I'm not comfortable to say, I really wish we would try harder not to do that, because I'm hearing the words and not seeing the action.
I remember I had a meeting I was in with some folks, and you'll hear me, I say the word folks a lot, right? Like
Yeah.
that is my alternative word. And often, even when I'm writing it, I'll write it with an X to be a bit more
Yeah.
even gender spectrum oriented as opposed to,
Yeah.
the traditional model. Those are very visible cues that you are giving to people that show you are taking steps to do that. But I can
Yeah.
remember as well sitting in a meeting where there was a conversation happening and I didn't really like it was just a total automatic thing where somebody said guys and I said and gals, right? Or I said and everybody else,
Yeah.
or something like that. And
Yeah.
another leader that was in that room who was of a different gender than I am or identifies as gender acknowledged the fact that I had done that. And I
Mm.
didn't think anything of it. It just slipped out, right? Like one of these
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
to just do that. But
It's a
the fact
personal
that they
priority.
noticed it and called it out, right, for me was like such a wake up call. And as leaders, we talk about visible commitment, but I also think visible commitment goes to supporting the behaviors we want to see in the
Yeah.
people around us as well. So it's not just about
Yeah.
our own personal visible commitment, but we commit to, recognizing and validating behaviors we want to see
Yeah.
in the
Really
folks.
good point.
Because that to me, it wasn't even about me. It was about that other leader who
Yeah.
recognized that I had done something that was leaning toward where she could see that I was
Yeah.
wanting to move in that direction and just gave that
Yeah.
little positive reinforcement. And it was all I need. I still think about that moment,
Yeah.
5-7 years later. And it's a conscious thing now for me every time I'm in a room to be careful. I don't always get it right.
Yeah.
I still make mistakes,
Yeah.
but you
Yeah.
know, isn't that crazy? Like just that one little term can
Yeah.
have such a
I know. And it's so wild to me because, I mean, I spent years even just using that term. And it wasn't until we kind of made those commitments in that workplace that was like, that it became, that became a standard for me. And so now, yeah. And all the time, when I'm writing. I don't default to folks. I find it hard to say, weirdly. I default to friends. And I don't know if that's right either, right? Hello, friends. Hi, pals. Hi, you know, but yeah, it's important. It's important. And it's such a small thing. I think one of the other things that is that, again, that visibility is putting pronouns on your email, or in on your Slack. Just that recognition that I'm open around this, that you can share your pronouns with me, that I won't assume your pronouns. They're such small things and such touch paper for some people, which is fascinating. But it's these tiny little visibilities that I feel like will make, bit by bit,
Well, and
help
as leaders
reinforce
too, right? Like
that.
so much of what our responsibility is to our teams is to create psychological safety, to create a
Right,
space where people have the kinds of conversations they want and need to have, right?
right.
And when we take these steps of visible commitment to create that space of inclusivity, right? That safety, it just extends out. Like, I mean, as leaders, we want high performing teams, we want
Yeah,
productivity, we want all that stuff. You get that to the next level when you are willing to visibly commit to inclusivity,
yeah,
right? I
yeah,
mean, there's a real, it's an easy win.
yeah.
But anyway, okay.
But it has to be authentic, and
Right.
it has to live in you. It's not just ticking a box.
That's right. That's right. So visible commitment, authentic commitment to diversity, challenging the status
Yeah.
quo, holding others accountable. We've agreed with all of that. Okay, so the next one on this list of traits is humility. You may have heard a little bit of that off the top when I acknowledged the fact that I suck at this, but it's inclusive leaders being modest about their capabilities, admitting mistakes, and creating the space for others to contribute. What do you think?
I think in any situation where there is this kind of volatility around it, the and because, when we're talking, even as somebody who is white, I have to be able to know that I don't know anything about the experience of somebody who's Indigenous, or and so I don't understand how you can not have humility around this, except that I see all the time people who don't. So yeah, I completely agree. I think, I mean, in any leadership, really, you have to be open to be able to make mistakes. You have to be open to hear that your opinion or what you're doing may or may not be inclusive or may not be right in the context or in the situation that you're in. I think, I mean, an agilist and a huge believer in servant leadership, but yeah, this one's a no-brainer for me. But as somebody, yourself, as a white male with a huge amount of privilege, how does it sit with you?
I mean, for me, just because, I mean, I wrestle with imposter syndrome. So I've got my own hangups there, which I think makes humility a bit more of a thing for me. But I mean, the flip to that is as a white male growing up in the age and the era that I've grown up in, it's fake it till you make it, right?
Right.
It's, you don't show your weakness. You don't show, you need to be confident. You need to, I can remember very early on, it came down to like even the business cards that I used back when we had business cards, the quality of my suit, the quality of my car, right? Like there was very much this outward bravado of, looking the part of a manager, looking the part of a leader, and a leader doesn't fail, right? Or a leader needs to be the one that's holding the flag and is always has the answer, right? And is cool, calm, and collected in the face of crisis.
Mm,
Like these are the messages that we've received,
mm,
right, from the generation before us, our mentors, our, leadership icons. So admitting a mistake, right? It also
mm,
comes with a lot more consequences as well, right?
mm,
Because we were given leadership and responsibility early on, right? Or we've been in a position of privilege to gain responsibility and opportunity early on, it also means that that fall can be that much harder for us if
Mm,
we make a mistake. And so
mm.
so there's that, maybe how humble do I have to be in order to get through this and get the result I'm after? Which is a very interesting way to look at things, maybe, but I would imagine is probably a conversation that goes on in a lot of white males' heads.
Maybe. I think one of the things that I think that I wonder, again, not white. I am white, but not male and not having a different kind of privilege. I wonder if that sense of admitting mistakes is emblematic of doing this requires change, or this whole conversation actually, at the core of this, becoming an organization that is more diverse and is more inclusive is going to demand a significant amount of change to the status of the people that hold privilege in those organizations. And so even before that humility, or, I mean, we've picked out a few things around what humility looks like, but I feel like it's that sense of understanding and embracing the fact I've had this privilege, and my choice to be more inclusive is going to put a dent. It's not going to put a dent in the privilege, but it's going to put a dent in the experience that I have in my workplace. And I think the humility actually needs to also be wrapped up in an acceptance of what this change is going to mean for me. I appreciate and acknowledge that I've had this privilege over this period and that it's not right, because my privilege means that somebody else is underprivileged, and that in order diversity and inclusion means adjusting that scale
Mm.
and that change. And I think a huge part of why people go into this, kicking and screaming internally is like, he's going to use a bad word then, but I would have to put an explicit tag on the podcast, but is, "Oh my goodness, this represents to me a loss of my privilege." And there's a lot of internal work, I think, that needs to happen for people to be able to embrace that.
Culturally and contextually as well, I think there's some things that are going on here as well, because we come from an era of work that was very hierarchical, right?
Right.
You weren't looking beside you and you weren't looking below you. You were always looking ahead of you. And so
Mhm.
your focus was on, how do I rank up, right? The only pathway to growth, the only pathway to more responsibility, more money, more opportunity was to increase your leadership, right? Level, to rank up, for lack of a better term. And so we have,
Climbing the
this
ladder.
this world where folks are so focused on ranking up that they don't have time or capacity to worry about what's going on beside or below them, right? Which further alienates folks that have different backgrounds and different experiences, and again creates that, well, why would, like, I fought tooth and nail to get these, responsibilities, to get these rewards, if you will, right, of status and opportunity. Why are you taking that away from me now, right? We see this happening. A great example right now is happening at this moment in time, date wise, in South Korea, where um, the government has decided that they want to increase enrollment for doctors because they don't have enough doctors to serve the country. And the doctors that have fought tooth and nail to get the positions they have, and fought, sacrificed all of their time and effort to get into the schools, are striking and protesting this increase in the number of slots for med school, because they see it as, people below them,
Diluting their privilege. Yeah.
they're losing their privilege, they're losing
Yeah.
all of the things they fought for. So there is some of that, and we, as white folks, as leaders, as people with privilege, we have to come to terms with that and be okay with giving up some of that privilege.
Mm.
Say, you know what, we probably shouldn't have had that in the first place. And that's maybe a good segue into the next trait, which is this
It is.
awareness of bias. So it's that inclusive leaders show awareness of personal blind spots as well as flaws in the system and work hard to ensure a meritocracy. So even the fact that you and I are having this conversation shows an awareness of bias. I think that in some industries, it's maybe easier than others. Tech tends to be flatter. We've done away with a lot of hierarchy in our organizations, remote, well, but it still exists. And it's, there are only so many leadership spots for people that want to be leaders. There's only so many pathways to grow in a lot of companies. And
Yeah.
I think
So we've been talking already. A lot of what we focused on is being specific about increasing diversity in leadership. And I think we're talking, this list is helpful in that sense, but it's also that sense of increasing diversity in our organizations so that it's not just how we have a whole team, you might have an agency, 50 or 100 people or 25 people. And if you're looking at that and going, how do we also increase the diversity around that? I think the conversation around the awareness of bias is really interesting because I've actually done, one of the groups that I have worked with, I'm always cautious because they actually brought consultants in to actually do I can't even remember how you described training in understanding and recognizing bias.
we just call it bias
The
training. That's
Yeah, okay.
bias,
Yeah, I feel like there was a word that we used and I can't remember what it was. None of that matters, but it was that sense of here are some and you can get online and you can actually fill in questionnaires that will actually show you the areas in which you are biased. And for me, growing up in rural New Zealand, in a country that has done a lot of work and is imperfect by a long way, but can be contrasted quite significantly with the country that I live in now, around racial issues, around putting aside the Indigenous element, but even my personal biases and the things that I highlighted in doing some of those questionnaires were very much around race. My dad is a boomer. I love him dearly. I know he's not going to hear this podcast, so I can probably say this. Has very strong opinions about people that are not like him. And I grew up with those, he works in a primary industry. The people that he would hire were often people that were not like him. And he had opinions about keeping them where they were working. Like, can't imagine Dad would have ever had a manager in his business who wasn't white. So, because in his head and mine, as I grew up, it's like, oh, hang on just a second. I was working with a whole tranche of people from a particular region that I had bias about and had to have that kind of surgically excise and go, wait, just a minute. And so there are places where we can get that awareness of bias. As organizations, we can provide those spaces for the teams that we're working in. And it becomes another thing that harks back to that visibility of the commitment is that, hey, we recognize that these are really important issues for our whole team, not just for the leadership. Because we want to, we're working you mentioned remote, and we're working with increasingly diverse, racially or regionally diverse groups, and how we structure the way that we do things within our organization is critically important. Learning the culture map and how different people operate, critically important things to actually make work smoother, not just for the people in leadership, but also for the people on the ground.
There's this interesting collection of graphs that maybe you've seen in your travels or around the internets of the different ways that countries approach negotiating to get to a deal. And, even between America and Canada, but Canada and the UK, like just how you go through the stages of negotiation and what that looks like. It's phenomenal reading to look at that as, culture analyst or a leadership person, because you very quickly see, okay, when I'm entering into a conversation with somebody on my team, right, this might be the approach that they take in that conversation to get to the decision that they need to get to.
Mhm.
And how are we in our remote, globally diverse workplaces actually addressing some of these? Like, it's very
Yeah.
interesting, like there's the challenge we have in our workplaces is we often see, transforming to whatever the status quo is or whatever the original way of working is as, the way that we're supposed to move forward. But that's actually completely non-diverse, right? Non-inclusive.
Mm.
It's,
Mm.
yeah, like for me, this whole idea of awareness of bias, I mean, we talk about it a bunch of different levels, but I think the biggest thing is, from my perspective, is being aware of our own personal blind spots. If as
Mm.
leaders we ignored everything else and we were just aware of our own personal blind spots, right? That self-awareness is an important trait as a leader.
Sure.
And, being aware of our blind spots, I just think that's such a powerful thing to start from. Right?
It feels like a good first step, right? It's
Yeah.
that sense of, I want to make a visible commitment. I want to be humble around all of this. I can't really do any of that until I recognize that I have blind spots and go looking at those.
Mhm.
Yeah, work starts with me, right? I feel like we jumped into cultural intelligence. Should we pick up there and circle back to the next one? Because I feel like
Yeah.
we're already halfway there. And you mentioned that graph around negotiation, and I want to highlight a book called The Culture Map by Erin Meyer, which is, I don't know enough about her background to kind of talk about where she comes from on that, but I have used that book and the reference. You can sign up to have reference to be able to, they have mapped the cultures in a number of different areas, negotiation being one of them, around how people do work. And we had a recent experience in my organization. The culture is primarily Australian. The leadership in the company is predominantly Australian. So we have that kind of white Anglo bias, I guess. And we're working with people that are outside, and we were struggling to connect with or to have people approach the work. I was going to say in the same way. It's not in the same way, but us as project managers were struggling to find the work happening. We were
Yeah.
struggling to get clarity around what was going on or what needed or how we needed to communicate. And we pulled up, I kind of, having gone through this before, pulled up the culture map for our country and the country of the person that we were struggling to connect with. And we were at opposite ends
Wow.
of the spectrum. There was no crossover.
Wow.
Where on one end, everybody needs to be direct, you need to be really explicit, and so we were doing all of that and being really explicit, and at the other end, it's all about relationship and
Mm.
nuance and reading between the lines. So we totally had to modify the way that we communicated what we needed and be so much more oblique around it so that they could do the reading between the lines rather than just
Wow.
feeling like they had this hammer coming at them of all of this expectation. So everybody, we're all Australian and we're all, oh, well, you could just be really direct about it, and everybody and for some people, that's just horrifying, and I'm
Mhm.
like, "Oh, okay." So that was a interesting learning. Anyway, the culture map, highly recommend. We'll throw that in the show notes to, as a place to actually, when we're talking about things like understanding that different cultures were going to approach very, important things within trying to get work done. It's really critical to kind
So
of get
the
a sense of
trait
how to.
that Dee has been referencing is this cultural intelligence, which is how inclusive leaders are attentive to others' cultures and adapt as required. And there is a case study right there
Woohoo!
of,
Yeah.
of what that looks like. So the next one is curiosity about others. So inclusive leaders demonstrate an open mindset and deep curiosity about others, listen without judgment, and seek with empathy to understand those around them. I think just generally, this is harder for men to do. I'm going to make judgment like a blanket statement here that say men suck at empathy just as a rule. And it's maybe a learned trait or something we have to work harder at. And maybe that's not true. Maybe that's just me. But empathy has been.
Is it sucking at empathy? Oh, I mean, I maybe it is. I'm not asking about you. Here's this ability to connect with other people outside of what you're immediately doing. And I think I'm going to say the P word, patriarchy, that has hurt men as much as it has hurt women. I feel like do that, I'm opening a door. But here's curiosity about others. Here, as someone, as a project manager and account manager who is charged with connecting with people, some of the first things that I'm doing are trying to kind of get an understanding of where I can make that connection with
Yeah.
somebody. Sometimes it's difficult to know. I've had people that I'm working with that are so quiet and they just don't let anything in. But I have also seen this behavior in men, and I don't know this. This is not giving very much away about themselves. So there's this wall up that I don't. Is it empathy? I also don't want to let anyone in. I don't know what that is protective about. But even the sense of having conversations with people and referring to my wife without giving her a name. And so I'm trying to work out how I thread that into, but there is this sense in which I feel there are often within that connection. And that is it feels like I have felt as a woman, men not wanting to let me in to their world, even in something as simple as my wife, Roseanne, and then using her names throughout future conversation. So, so I guess with my question around, is it empathy and you can only speak to your experience on this, but what is that? What is that that makes it so difficult for us to connect?
It could be a generational thing around compartmentalization.
Right.
So we spoke a little bit earlier about, that fear of failure or like the leader needing to be perfect, and that, like how my generation of leaders looked to the leaders, that were our role models, right? Like we had a very, you know, for lack of a better term, bro kind of like personality to go after. And there very much was a line, of work life and home life or outside of work life. I think the traits that were celebrated and rewarded, the ways of working, the ways of thinking that were rewarded were ones that were very task oriented and
Mhm.
focused on the work as opposed to
Right.
empathy and people oriented. And I know for
Mm.
myself that has been a learning journey because I lean task, right? Like that is
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
natural bent, is to go into a conversation with my direct reports and not ask them about how they're going, what they did at the weekend,
Yeah.
you know, what TV shows are, catching them up, like anything like that, because I just naturally lean into task. So I
Yeah.
have had to work as an individual and as a leader on my curiosity about others. So maybe it is a
Yeah.
bit, I suspect, cultivated a leadership, a kind of leader in the world, right? Or at least in the Western world, that is more
Mhm.
task oriented than people
Right.
oriented.
Yeah, that makes sense.
This is getting really fun and really deep. I
Oh,
love this.
I know. I'm like, oh, there's just so much to unpack around all of that. But that curious, I mean, because even then, when you're talking about that blurring that line between home and work, is like there's some fraught territory in there too, right?
Mhm.
And so yeah, super mindful around. But that sense of, hey, I'm working with these people. They are not just cogs in my machine. They have rich internal lives. They've chosen to spend time with me in this scenario of our business and what we're building and working towards for this season. And so it's being able to value not just what they contribute to your bottom line, but also what can they contribute to your culture, what they contribute. And even from that cultural perspective of We have an organization that may be kind of rooted in Australia, but we have people that celebrate different holidays to us. What do they look like? How does that affect your work life? It's Ramadan at the moment. How does that affect what is you doing in your workplace at the moment to make sure that you're accommodating people who are fasting? So all of these things, and what does that mean? And I know, I've talked to people in the that community around, well, what does this actually mean to your day-to-day work? How can we put things in place that actually help support you?
Yeah. And
It's
what does reasonable
critical.
accommodation look like in that
Yeah,
context, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Well, the last one on our list, and this is starting to get long, so I've got a few minutes left, but a few more things to talk about. But effective collaboration is the last trait. So inclusive leaders empower others, pay attention to diversity of thinking and psychological safety, and focus on team cohesion. That is the last trait of the 6. Effective collaboration.
Which kind of loops in all of those things above it, right? You can't effectively collaborate if you're not humble. It's not effective collaboration if you're telling everybody what to do. So you have to be open to around all of that. You have to be curious around others to be able to effectively collaborate. So that just feels like almost a wrapper around it, really,
Yeah,
to
and
me at any rate. Yeah.
it's interesting to me to think too, like just on how a lot of these things are not necessarily just things that inclusive leaders need, but all leaders,
Right?
right? Like
Yeah.
an awareness of bias will help you not just in terms of diversity and inclusion and equity, but it'll also help you just in making better decisions,
Right.
right? Like curiosity about others is just a good thing to be as a leader if you want.
As a human being.
But
Yeah.
it's funny, right? How we have to articulate these things and say them so explicitly in this way in order for people to understand them and
Mm.
get them. Folks, this is maybe because of my privilege and the training that I've had and the experiences I've been able to have, this does not feel like rocket science to me. This feels like just the right things for any leader in any situation to do. More so, though, is the application to this particular conversation around inclusivity. That
Right.
as you take these things and you apply them in your leadership and do them specifically in an area of inclusivity and equity and belonging, it'll pay dividends, right?
Right. Definitely.
Well, so of the 6, the one that HBR says is the number 1, what's your guess of the 6?
That's a tricky one. I feel like it's probably the personal one.
Okay.
I can't see it. I've got a pop-up that's popped up in front of my screen and I can't actually see it. But the one that I think it was, what was this? Remind me what they are.
Visible commitment, humility, awareness of bias, curiosity about others, cultural intelligence, and effective collaboration.
Yeah, I think it's awareness of bias. It
You are
feels like to me it has to
absolutely
start with that.
correct. That is the number
Oh,
1.
thank goodness.
You passed
Yeah.
the test.
Yay.
Well, we've talked a lot about these traits, right? And traits are things that are very much internal to you. We can start to think maybe about how we might apply them, but we did a little bit of extra work here. And because this topic is so important, we're going to take a little bit of time now and talk about how we apply this or some things that we can do practically as leaders to make sure that we are more inclusive or leaning into these traits more. Dee, you and I think we're going to be a broken record. Everyone's going to talk to us, and the only thing they're going to know about us is we say that leadership is proactive. And that
Yeah.
we start with trust. Those are the 2 things
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
we say almost every time. But if
Yeah.
leadership is proactive, that means we have to be willing to take steps. So we've come up with a
Yeah.
couple of ideas here that we think will help you. And the first one is this idea of a diverse personal advisory board. Now, Dee, are you familiar with the concept of a personal advisory board?
Not really. So tell me about it.
Okay, so
yeah.
this is something I've encountered in my own lived experience as an entrepreneur in some of the different like coaching groups that I've been in, it's this idea where you find a group of peers that can act as your personal board of directors. So if you imagine most corporations, you have a board that acts as like that top level policy thing. And for the CEO in particular, they're the ones that are advising the CEO on policy and changes and things to do with the business. And so you are not restricted to having a board once you hit CEO. You can have one as, manager of a team, right? Or a manager of managers. And the whole concept is some of your peers or people who you have given permission to bounce ideas off of, call you out.
Well, speak into your life, right? It's that sense of these are the people that I trust that I will allow to contribute and then allow to, to share their opinion of me and with me.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And so
I can see that there is absolutely value in that.
And very much in a professional context, right? So
Right.
you might have 4 or 5 folks that you give permission to talk to about all kinds of things. And so you go to them with your thinking, hey, I want to do this. If your personal advisory board is not diverse, if you do not have people from different backgrounds, if everyone looks the same as you and comes from the same belief structure, belief system, you're going to get a very one-sided, blind spot heavy view of your decisions, of your approach. And so taking steps to increase the diversity of your advisory board is one way, right, that you can actually practically take steps toward inclusive leadership.
I think I love it. As somebody whose friend group in the past hasn't been, or even now really isn't particularly diverse, it feels like a big thing to try and set up if you're not already moving in diverse circles. So I don't want to put people off. You don't have to find 5 or 6 people all at once. I think there is also a sense of even increasing the diversity of the people that you're listening to, the podcasts that you're listening to, the Twitter feeds that you read, I think. And I look at my Instagram feed at the moment, and I have made some really conscious decisions, when we were going through some of when Black Lives Matter was at its height, increasing the Black voices that are coming through my Twitter feed. And when any of these areas that you kind of want to get more aware of, it's also increasing what you're consuming, the diversity of what you're consuming. I think
really
is
great
also
example.
Yeah.
I can point to my own story there just on X, right? Where like we talk about AI right now and AI and WordPress being a big thing. And so I just did a random call out on X, Twitter, asking where are the underrepresented groups that are speaking with authority on this subject in WordPress? Are there any women?
Yeah.
Are there any people of color who are leading AI in WordPress that I can add to my network? I already have 6 white guys who can tell me everything I need to know about AI. Right?
Yeah.
Where are those other folks? And even just being willing to do that and expand your network, as you said, I think, that's such that's exactly right. Expanding that. Sorry, I probably just cut you off, but I had that thought.
No, you didn't. I was just thinking, if I was in the audience hearing that, going, who would be on my diverse personal advisory board? And I'm like, I would have to work really hard to find people to put on that I have a significant enough relationship with to be able to allow. Now, I am lucky, certainly in WordPress, in knowing quite a few people with different voices, so I could probably do that. I think for a lot of us will go, I don't know how I would do that, because it feels to me like if you're going to let people in, there has to be some relationship there. So how do you build up that relationship? You have to start by hearing some of those
So
voices.
maybe that's the first step.
Yeah, maybe it is.
Leadership being proactive. It's okay. I need to lean into some relationships side of my core circle right now,
Right.
and
Yeah.
invest the next 3, 6, 12 months in building enough trust between us that I can rely on them and count them as not just
Yeah.
a resource as an advisory board member, but as a friend and a colleague that.
Yeah. Yeah.
The next one is share our learnings. So the question that we have here is, are there appropriate places for you as a leader to share what you're learning as it relates to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging? Do you have a regular cadence in your stand-ups or meetings where inclusion is front and center? One recommendation I saw was, like an inclusivity moment in your agenda where you
Wow.
create space for a conversation to happen. Hey, this is what I'm learning about
Yeah.
inclusivity this week or this month. And you create that
Yeah.
space for conversation. And again, we talk about safe spaces, and it has to start with the leader. So if you are the leader, being willing to share your learnings, I think, is a really powerful way to at least engage those conversations and visibly show your commitment to inclusivity.
I think that's really important. I also want to circle back, because I know that it's not on the list, but I want to circle back to that awareness of bias. And I think for all of us, well, like one of the critical next steps can actually be sitting down and looking internally and going, what are my biases? Where are some of those areas that it's like, where are the logs that I need to take out of my own eye before I try and take a speck out of someone else's? But that sense of, and so again, we'll put in the show notes the links to some of those surveys that you can do that help you just as a, individual, poke around internally and do some of that early work. Because if the awareness of bias is one of those most critical things to start with, then that's a really good way of uncovering what that looks like.
Yeah, and like we keep saying, leadership doesn't happen to you, right? Like, you've got to do the work. So being willing to at yourself, look at your own situation,
Starts with me. It
right? It
starts
starts
with
with
me.
me,
Yeah.
absolutely. And the last thing that we had on this list, what practical things that you can do, is to join employee resource groups. So, Dee, for folks who maybe don't know what an ERG is, can you give maybe a quick summary of what an ERG is? And
That's really funny, because that was the term as I only came up against that this morning. Thank you very much for dropping me in that. It's a group. So I think I probably need to pass it back to you, because I'll make a guess just based on that acronym. ERGs.
yeah, so an employee resource group it's a bit of an HR term, but the whole concept is want to create safe spaces for underrepresented groups in your workplace to be able to gather, to talk, to connect, bond, and do life together. So you might have an employee
Right.
resource group of people who identify as LGBTQIA.
Right. Okay. So this is like Slack channels in your Slack thing. Here's the. Uh, okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Those I have seen and participated in. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's the women, that women, like there might be a women in leadership one. I just saying the women
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
came out wrong.
Yeah.
But it's often ERGs can go beyond that, because they can also include like specific supports. They might do events together if your team
Right.
is in a
Yeah.
single location, right? Or they might do
Yeah.
champion events, or do sponsorships, or create educational opportunities for the rest of the company to learn more about your affinity, things like that. So,
Yeah.
or your underrepresented group. So I think it's an opportunity for leaders to engage directly, right? Allyship is important, and a great way to learn about the lived experiences of
Yeah.
others is to actually engage with folks in that
Yeah.
group and learn more about what it's like
Right.
to do that. I put the caveat
Yeah.
in here that ERGs are great as long as we get the balance right between overstuffing a group with allies to the point where the allies are outnumbering the actual employees who represent that group, and it becomes an
Yeah.
unsafe space or just another Slack channel. And what does that look like? So
You could do a whole podcast episode on how to actually engage in some of those places safely, right?
Well, well, we have spent a lot of time on this topic. It's been fun.
It was
Hopefully
good. Love
folks are
it.
walking away learning stuff. I mean, you probably have lots of thoughts out there in the world, and we want to hear them. So please definitely comment if you like it. If you are interested in more conversations like this, subscribe, because we'd love to have you on the, you know, the wagon for all these other
And
things
the
that we talk
chats.
about as it relates to this stuff. But I am curious, what are you doing as a leader? What's your company doing, your organization doing to tackle some of these things? It's not going away. It's not something that should ever go away. It's something that is going to
Yep.
become more and more just second nature to us as leaders as we lean into this.
Sure hope so.
But yeah, so that's it from us for this week. Thank you, Dee, as always, for hanging out.
Thank you, James. Nice to be here.
We'll see you all next time.
Ciao.